Okay, welcome to the 27th episode of Cinelit, where we are following on from our success of our podcast on the legacy of King Kong by taking a look at the other side of the tail of the tape for his forthcoming opponent. Yes, we are looking at the form of that perennial terror of Tokyo, Gojira, or Godzilla as he is more commonly known. I am your host, Adam Marsh, and joining me on this journey through the decades of wanton destruction and blatant disregard for public safety is Cinelit's resident expert, Daryl Buxton. How are you, Daryl?
I'm good, thanks, Adam. Looking forward to talking about the big G.
And also making his return to Cinelit is Peter Mumford. Peter has been programming East Asian cinema at Quad, our host cinema, for the best part of a decade now in the form of Satori Screen, and has programmed the big guy on the big screen many times now. Hello, Peter.
Hello, Adam. Hello, Daryl. Yeah, I think it's three. Is it three times now? Yeah. I think three.
I think so.
I think you're right. Yeah.
And then Mothra once, but Godzilla's not in the first Mothra film. Yeah, that's what confused me.
So we're familiar with giant monsters, is what what I'm saying. Now, before we start, let's just explain to the I guess the uninitiated. Godzilla is a kaiju film. So that term is much more familiar to Western audiences now than it was, say, 20 years ago. Kaiju being a Japanese genre of film featuring giant monsters, fairly basic description, of which Gojira is considered the first of the genre, particularly in Japan. Some people tend to dial it back and include King Kong and Lost World in those kaiju movies, but I'm saying it starts with Godzilla. It starts with a big G. Okay, so rather than go through each individual 36 Godzilla movies in detail at great length over this podcast, which would be insanity, we're going to broadly structure our talk in looking at the various eras of Godzillas that they tend to be divided up into. So we're going to start with the Showa era, which covers 15 films made between 1954 and 1975. And let's begin with the original and best, I guess, in many people's eyes, Gojira, 1954. Who wants to start? I'll start, actually. I've got in my collection an original UK cinema quad for the film. An original. Sounds way more impressive than it actually is, because the film wasn't released in UK cinemas until 2005. So I'm cheating there, but that was the first official cinema release in the UK came in 2005. Prior to that, we had the original version that was played around from 1956 was the Americanized version, which was edited down to 80 minutes and had at least 30% more Raymond Burr than most films have. I guess
Raymond Burr as Steve Martin.
Martin.
Yeah. As opposed to Steve Martin as Raymond Burr.
I'd pay to see either. I really would. So I'm assuming that everyone's first experience of Godzilla, the 1954 version, was this 1956 Americanized version.
Yes, yeah.
I'm not sure it was for me.
No,
I think I don't know. Maybe it wasn't the first. I definitely saw other Godzilla films before I saw the first Godzilla film. Just kind of on a BBC Two Bank Holiday afternoon type thing when they would show, I guess, some of the goofier later entries. So I'm not sure I saw the original until maybe it was the DVD that followed that release in the mid 2000s. Yeah. So I think I have seen the Raymond Burr version since, but it wasn't my introduction. I went in for the full Japanese cut with the actual serious film that is people sometimes forget is the original Godzilla.
The proper one. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's. I mean, my first version was seeing the video releases that were released to coincide with the 1998 American reboot version in the late 90s, and they released loads of the Godzilla movies on VHS around that period. And I think that's where I first saw it, and it was the American version then. But yeah, but like you said, it's a serious film in many ways. It follows that pattern of having a great first movie that starts the franchise off, and then none of them ever really reached that peak, maybe?
Well, it depends what you want from a Godzilla film, I guess.
Yeah.
When you could go to a library and find a number of academic articles all about the first Godzilla film and how it reflects kind of Japan at post-World War II and after the atomic bomb and all that. And it's all definitely there in that first film. It is kind of, you could definitely see Godzilla as a metaphor for this massive destructive thing that there's no defense for, and things like that. And it's quite a seriously intended film. Godzilla's the only monster in it. It's got some. The tone maintains its seriousness without. It's not like some of the later Godzilla films where they're kind of like, well, now we need to. It's been 10 minutes. We need better have some slapstick for the kids. But it is an excellent film, definitely. But you say to someone, do you want to watch a great Godzilla film now? If you show them the first Godzilla film, they won't necessarily see that as a great Godzilla film because that's not what they associate with Godzilla anymore.
Yeah, it has definitely morphed over its decades and decades, hasn't it? It's not the same beast as it was in 1954. Yeah. So the director came to the UK and saw The Beast from 20,000 Fathoms in 1953 and was inspired to make his own version, giant monster movie when he went back to Japan. And this coincided with a news story about I'm going to mispronounce the of this now, but Daigo Fukurimaru incident.
Just call it Lucky Dragon 5, Adam.
Lucky Dragon 5, there you go.
English name, yeah.
I know, but I was trying to be authentic, Daryl. Come on. Which happened, I noticed that was a fallout of the Bikini Atoll weapons tests by the USA.
Yeah, this was a tuna boat, wasn't it? A fishing
right,
boat.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, mutated fishing, irradiated tuna, which he obviously thought, well, I can do something with that. And turned it into a gigantic Godzilla movie. So it's obviously ripped from the headlines in some ways, and inspired by obviously things like King Kong and this Beast of the 20,000 Fathoms, which had special effects by Ray Harryhausen. So he gets his fingers in everything, doesn't he, Ray Harryhausen, in the history of monster cinema.
Yeah. One other thing about the that sort of early history of Godzilla is it should never have happened. It should never have been made at all, because Toho were planning to make, I think it was a film about a war in Indonesia or something, and they were sort of trying to organise it with an Indonesian company as a co-production, and the Indonesian government stepped in and said, we're not happy about some of the content and some of the things that you're going to say about our country. And the whole thing fell through. And Tomoyuki Tanaka, who was going to produce the movie, had suddenly got this hole in his production slate. And it's like, right, we can't make this war movie. What are we going to do? And as you say, Adam, he then saw Beast from 20,000 Fathoms and just thought, there you go. We'll do a big monster movie.
And they did. A monster movie that inspired decades and decades of more and more. But it is, I mean, this and I guess the sequel, Godzilla Raids Again, are the first are fairly serious in their tone, and that all changes as we go along.
Yeah, well, even Godzilla Raids Again got released to the West as Gigantis the Fire Monster. So they in around the world they weren't even acknowledging that Godzilla was a thing. You've had the first Godzilla in your Raymond Burr version, and then the sequel comes out fairly quickly and gets sold as Gigantis all over the place. So it took really until the 60s and the matchup with King Kong that we discussed on the Kong podcast before the West really started to find out who and what Godzilla was all about.
Yeah, because if you look at the sort of like the sort of like rundown of the movies that as they were released, there's like a big 4 or 5 year gap between Godzilla Raids Again and the third movie, King Kong versus Godzilla. However, they weren't just sitting around going, "What should we do? I don't know. Let's have a fag." You know, they were creating other kaiju films around that period, including like Mothra and Rodan were both introduced in that period in between the two.
Yeah, I guess the franchise aspect hadn't really, the light bulb hadn't gone off above the heads. Was it? And then I guess it was I'm remembering right, 1962, King Kong versus Godzilla.
Yeah.
and somehow through some weird quirk they had ended up with the rights to the character of King Kong, and they needed to do something with it, and then someone thought, well, we could bring Godzilla back. And then I guess that's when the franchise was born at that point, because then they were banging out a film a year for the next decade or more.
Yeah, and what happened after that was they because they'd done all of these other monster movies that were just sort of floating around on their own. So suddenly you're in a Marvel Cinematic Universe situation.
Yeah.
It's like, right, we can team everyone up now, you know. So you get Godzilla versus the Thing, or Mothra versus Godzilla, as it's better known now. Possibly, other than the very first movie, I think possibly my favourite, just because I love Mothra so much as a character, and I love the whole sort of world around Mothra, Infant Island, and the Peanuts, the two tiny twin singers who sort of command Mothra through the power of song, you know. And I just love all of the magic of that world, and having that clash with Godzilla sort of coming in and treading on buildings is fantastic. And so yeah, straight away there, we've developed this universe almost by accident, but let's now use it and develop it.
If you look at the history over the whole run, there's some amazingly diverse ideas that go into the making up of Godzilla. You know, obviously you've got the nuclear fallout, blah, 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 and then suddenly you get all the fantasy elements of Mothra. Then you have time travel in one of them. You've got alien invaders that come on later on. You literally hit all kinds.
By the early 70s, you've got Godzilla versus Hedorah, which many people know under the more familiar title, Godzilla versus the Smog Monster, which says it all. So you've got a Godzilla movie, A, about pollution, and B, although it's made in 1971, it's psychedelia had obviously come a little bit late to Japan because it's a really freaky psychedelic movie as well. So yeah, it's sort of, the series sort of keeps with the times, and I think that's happening right up to today. You know, it sort of reflects the times that the films are made in.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, they obviously made some kind of editorial decision in the early 60s to make it more family friendly, because the first one is not. It's not family unfriendly, but it's not aimed as an audience for families and kids.
I think that is even more so by the end of the 60s, though, because when they start having child protagonists and things towards the end of the 60s into the 70s, which kind of is always a clue that they think, oh, actually, most of our audience are under 12, or and their parents, I guess. But yeah.
And certainly in Britain, the films were marketed at kids. They were getting U certificates. You know, sometimes they were being cut to get a U certificate, and they play on Saturday morning TV as well. You know, Peter was talking about this earlier, and I was watching these in the 70s as a kid. You know. On either Saturday mornings or Thursday afternoons they'd be on. And I remember distinctly seeing Ebirah, Horror of the Deep, in which Godzilla fights a giant lobster, of course.
Yeah, naturally.
I watched that after getting home from school one Thursday afternoon. So, you know, that's the sort of audience that the films were being aimed at, sort of from the mid-60s right through until the end of the Showa period, really, up to 75.
So some of the things that make that original so good have continued on, and one of them is the score and the sound design, because the sound of Godzilla just is instantly recognizable, whether it's now or whether it was back in 1954. That kind of screeching sound that Godzilla makes has been continued on throughout the history. And the original score by Akira Ifukube is an astonishing score, really, because it holds up so well, and the refrains are still being used in Godzilla movies to this day. I mean, I think Godzilla versus Godzilla King of Monsters, the American remake, has some of the riffs from the original in that score as well.
And I think to a fairly wide audience, it's recognisable. Maybe not quite as much as something like the Jaws motif, but it's getting there. I think you know there's a sizable percentage of the audience sort of recognise the Godzilla soundtrack when they hear it.
Yes, definitely.
As well, I should have looked this up in advance. There was a rap song about, it must be 15 years ago or more, that was a hit that had the Godzilla fanfare sampled in it. I think illegally initially until letters were exchanged. And I'll have to look that up and send you the YouTube link, Adam, to put on the Cinelit page or something, because I can hear the song without remembering who it's by.
I was expecting you to go into the full rap. I was remaining silent just to bait you into it.
As we know, Adam, I'm not a natural rapper.
No, you're not. You're not. So it's quite an interesting period. This whole then boom, 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 and then they were looking to wind it down. I think towards the end of the 60s, because the receipts weren't coming in as much, the money wasn't coming as much, and then they did Destroy All Monsters, which was a big hit and kickstarted it again into the mid 70s.
Which Pete, that's one of the 3 films you've shown, Pete, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's quite an unusual one as well, because it is, for a film called Destroy All Monsters, it is quite monster-like for about 2/3 of the running time. It's all this sci-fi plot, and then at the end, Godzilla comes in and gets in a battle royale with all these other monsters. But it doesn't give you it on a plate. You have to sit through a good chunk of the film before what you've paid your ticket for.
Yeah. Now, to be fair, that's been the case in several of the films prior to that, from the sort of mid 60s onwards, like Invasion of Astro Monster and films like that, where you get these films where aliens come to Earth and control monsters on Earth, or they whisk the monsters back to their own planet, and it turns out they're controlling them there to sort of train them to come back to Earth so that they can take over our planet. And then the monsters are almost in there as an afterthought or as a sort of plot point rather than the focus. Now, the difference, as you say, with Destroy All Monsters is in the title. You know, you think, oh yeah, this is going to be, after years and years of getting these films that have got Godzilla and Rodan and King Ghidorah in as an afterthought, you know, we're finally going to get to see the big rumble, you know. And it turns out, oh, it's just like all the others, you know. They're in it for a few minutes here and there.
Is it Destroy All Monsters as well that introduces the concept of Monster Island, this kind of little island off Japan somewhere? Where all
I think that's right, yeah. I think that's the first time you see it. Yeah. One thing I will mention is watching it at the Quad when you programmed it was particularly great for Derby audiences, because there's one scene where one of the monsters, I can't remember if it's Godzilla or one of the others, but one monster actually crashes into a building and destroys it, and it looks identical to Derby assembly rooms.
Yeah, it's quite an interesting one. I just reminded of Invasion of the Astro Monsters, Daryl. You mentioned it, Daryl. I was watching that one. I'm in my trying to attempt to watch as many of these films before recording today, and I'm about 40 minutes in, and I'm thinking, it's not going much. It's not going where. Not going much. This is come on. I'm gonna knock this off and whack on Ibraya Horror of the Deep in a minute or something like that. And then, literally, as soon as I was thinking that, I go out of the room, make a cup of tea, come back in, and there's Godzilla and Rodan encircled in 2 giant orbs being lifted up into a spaceship. I'm like, have I gone out and come back into a different movie here? What's going on? It really kicks on from there. But that's one of the great things about these movies. I think you're right, Pete, on the whole franchise thing we were talking about. Did they know what they had with the Godzilla character and the franchise elements of it? Because from 1971 onwards, every film has the name Godzilla in the title.
Yeah.
Whereas a lot of these 60s ones, sometimes they just forget to include Godzilla in the title. You know, Invasion of the Astro Monster. It's like, should have been Godzilla and the Invasion of the Astro Monster.
Well, I think it's Godzilla was the star by that point. He had kind of, all of these monsters were popular, but Godzilla was always that notch above. He was the one that was getting.
You didn't need him in the title. You just needed him above the title.
Yeah. He'd not got a good enough agent in 1965.
Obviously.
I think it's to do with kind of the Japanese film industry was kind of having a really tough time the late 60s and early 70s, and it kind of led, TV was doing it a lot of damage, which led to it kind of a lot of Japanese films at that point, they either went really extreme in terms of content, so they were showing things that couldn't be on television in terms of sex and violence and things, or they went firmly the other end and went fairly as family friendly as you could want. And I think among kids, Godzilla was the star, and so they were going for the pester power, I guess. So if a kid can read Godzilla on a poster and say to Mum, I want to go and see that, then that's two bums on seats. Sort of thing.
Yeah. I'm just surprised. I'm just surprised all of those 60s ones weren't called Godzilla or Godzilla versus.
Yeah, that became a trend sort of from the 70s. You know, where the 60s was very, very different. One point we've not mentioned so far is the vast majority of the first run of Godzilla films were all directed by the same guy. There's a couple of instances where new directors come on, but they're mainly directed by Ishiro Honda, and he was also directing a lot of the other monster movies as well, and a lot of other science fiction movies. And the best friend, or one of the best friends of Akira Kurosawa. And I think he'd worked as an assistant on some of the Kurosawa films too. So
Honda ended his career doing second unit for Kurosawa on Ran and Kagemusha.
Yes, yeah. But I think they'd known each other way before that as well, Peter. So it was almost like him coming back to sort of help his old mate out. But I do believe that they stayed mates for their whole lives. I believe that Honda has mentioned here and there that Kurosawa would sort of occasionally go and see the Godzilla films with him, and
they'd use the same cast as well a lot of the time. It's kind of, I've seen it written, can't remember where, before people sort of, like in the 60s when all these Western critics were fawning over Akira Kurosawa films and praising the casting them. Then the same actor would turn up in a Godzilla film and they'd be called ridiculous Japanese actors, over the top performances and all this. And it was always the same actors. Like the very first Godzilla film stars Takeshi Shimura, who was in many Kurosawa films. He's probably Ikiru's probably his biggest role for Kurosawa, but probably his most famous ones. He's the leader of the samurai in Seven Samurai who cuts his top knot off, and things like that. And the Godzilla films, they've got great casts. They don't get credit for that.
Well, I guess they don't really stand out. I think that's one of the big criticisms, full stop, of the franchise. They've never quite got the human element right in Godzilla, I don't think. Particularly, like, in the more recent movies. They just, just get to the fighting.
I think that's fair to say. I think there are sort of three elements to the films, really. There's the sort of human characters. There are the monsters. And then there's a thing that I've noticed that Honda really, really focuses on in its films. And it's quite interesting that it almost parallels what's happening with the monsters. He seems very, very interested in things like weather and in things like natural disasters and that sort of thing. I mean, there's one of the films that I rewatched this week, one of the sort of early 60s films or sort of mid 60s films, starts with about 3 or 4 minutes of just sort of swirling rain. And as I was watching this, I thought exactly what you've just said about actors there, Peter. I thought if this was the opening shot of a Kurosawa movie, the critics would be going berserk, because it's the opening shot of Monster Zero or something. It's going to be dismissed. It's going to be, or they're just going to say, what's all this padding, But Honda really, really seems interested in showing the environment and the wild environment. And it's almost like it's sort of parallel to the activity of the monsters later in the film, almost as though he's saying that the monsters, yes, those of you that think the monsters are a metaphor, you're right. I'm actually going to depict that on screen. So
I think the weather is also, and it seems to be a thing in the 60s, like villains having weather control satellites, and that kind of seems to be a big major plot point in loads of movies. In the 60s.
I mean it's there in Bond and all the sort of spy rip-offs. Yeah.
Something in the air. Literally.
failed Avengers movie all about Sean Connery wanting to control the weather.
Yeah.
The 90s one, yeah. I think they come back to it 4 or 5 times in Godzilla movies. The idea of controlling the weather. I guess maybe it's one of those mentalities like, well, what can we possibly throw at these monsters that could give the humans a chance? And weather seems to be the one. So let's round off. Let's just go back to this Showa era. What comes out of this era that is a keeper, I guess, because going forward, because I guess you got obviously Godzilla as the lead, as the star, Mothra supporting characters, Rodan, King Ghidorah as the perennial friend / a guy.
They were the big four who were referenced in was it Kong Skull Island at the end in the post-credit sequence. So I think they're the 4 characters that it's perceived that Western audiences know from the Showa era. Although I think if you were sat in the audience watching Skull Island, there were an awful lot of people sort of scratching their heads at that and saying, what's this all about?
Well, they were all featured in King of Monsters, which came out 2017, 2018, whatever it was, the second Godzilla movie. They were all in that movie. So, but yeah, definitely they feel like the ones that stuck their head above and became more well known throughout, because they come back to those characters.
You're not seeing Ebirah the giant lobster anytime soon.
No, I mean the other one was released at the fag end of the initial run of Godzilla movies, and that was Godzilla versus Mechagodzilla, and the idea of a mechanical Godzilla, which remarkably came about 4 or 5 years after Mecha Kong was in King Kong Escapes.
Yeah, that's such a weird thing that you'd think it'd be the other way around. But
it took them so bloody long as well. It's like you've already introduced a mecha character, introduced Mechagodzilla.
Yeah, and Mechagodzilla got not only into the last 2 films, but I think he's named in the title of the last 2 films as well. And then of course, even there are rumours sort of flying around that he may appear in the new film. But even prior to that, he was featured quite heavily in Steven Spielberg's Ready Player One.
Oh yeah,
he was. Yeah. Do you think he's a bit cheaper to get the rights for Mechagodzilla than the real Godzilla? I don't know.
Does that matter to Steven Spielberg? Whether the rights are cheap?
He's sitting there thinking, God, I've spent loads of money on getting Chucky. Can I afford Mechagodzilla?
Well, I think another thing to note from the original kind of first run of Godzilla is the whole kind of genre was born for it, not only in film but on TV. Kind of what's referred to as the Tokakatsu shows, kind of things like what the most obvious example to British viewers, at least, is the things like Power Rangers and stuff. That all comes out of Godzilla because the guy who did most the special effects of most of the original Godzilla is this guy called Eiji Tsuburaya, who deserves to be mentioned alongside Ishiro.
Definitely.
Godzilla. And he got so successful from doing Godzilla, he was able to go off to TV, and he first did a show called Ultra Q, which is a kind of a story, a different. It's not got a running story. It has returning characters, but each episode is a different story where they would reuse costumes and things from the monster movies he'd been making. And then out of Ultra Q came Ultraman, which is a superhero show, which then Ultraman became this giant runaway success in Japan. And then for 40, 50 years since, you've had all these shows like Kamen Rider, Power Rangers, like I said, and stuff like that. And then, Godzilla's responsible for a lot of kind of Japanese science fiction culture of the last 50 years, I guess, indirectly, you could say.
Yeah, as you say, right up to Power Rangers and so on. Yeah. I recall being at a comic convention sometime in the late 80s, and they were showing episodes of, so it was something like Ultraman or Spectreman or one of those shows, and it was either Godzilla or a very Godzilla-like monster, possibly with a different name because of rights issues and so on. Actually appeared in it. So
there was a show called Zone Fighter in the 1973, which Godzilla appeared in 5 episodes of.
I must have seen one of those then. Yeah.
There you go. So you're one of the few outside of Japan, Daryl, who's seen that.
I think it's just a case of they had the suit in the warehouse. They needed something for that episode. Right.
Yeah.
Toho needs that guy to do the special effects of the films. They're going to have a problem if they annoy him, so they let him use it.
Yeah. But definitely big shout out to Subaraya, who I think identifies the look of these films even more than Ishiro Honda does. I think when people think about Godzilla, and especially if you think about the Showa films, the cliche is, and it's a cliche because it's true, they're all about Godzilla stamping on buildings, and that's all down to Subaraya and they're easy to mock and they're easy to sort of parody and stuff, but when you actually watch the films, and if you give a little bit of leeway, his work is tremendous.
The miniature works is amazing. Just things like there's like the classic one is like all the little tanks rolling along to fire ineffectually.
Brilliant.
But the detail that goes into that, and then I guess there's some kind of engineering work to make these things move, and it all works together. And there's something admirable about it compared to having a team of 50 people sit at MacBooks for a year.
Yeah, I mean, one of those things about like that kind of miniature work. You obviously had Harryhausen doing his stop motion stuff, but you also had like Jerry Anderson doing the Thunderbirds and things like that throughout the 60s and into the 70s. And this feels very much in that same wave, worldwide wave of utilizing miniatures at the very tippy top of their quality level. And obviously, it lasted way beyond any other shows, any other films. We're still using those techniques. You don't get those type of techniques used in movies anymore. Even in the most recent Godzilla, you didn't get miniature stuff, did you?
Yeah. Well, Peter's just reminded me. Actually, there was a documentary an hour-long documentary on TV around the time of the Roland Emmerich film, which I think we're going to touch on a bit later, in the late 90s. And to coincide with that, there was an hour-long documentary on British TV about the history of special effects in Godzilla. And our pal John Smith, we'll give a shout out to John. I remember talking to John about this after it aired, and he said, well, I really enjoyed the first 50 minutes of it because it was Alex Cox presenting, and he was interviewing all kinds of interesting people, the guys that had been inside the Godzilla suits, and people that had worked alongside Subaraya and all of this, and the stories were amazing about blowing up these little toy buildings and toy tanks, and the guys getting in the suit and being fitted for the suit and everything. 50 minutes of fantastic anecdotes. And then John said the last 10 minutes was just guys talking about sitting at their computers.
Yeah.
And it killed it,
Yeah, designing a rubbish Godzilla,
Yeah. Which we'll come on to, yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. So that's the first wave. Then we had a break of about 9 years between that wave, and then we went into the Heisei era, which is from 1984. But prior to that, we had a few other sort of like interactions with the Western world. Godzilla. We had the Godzilla TV cartoon, which was made by Hanna-Barbera, which gave the world Godzuki. Is that right? Was that the first introduction of Godzuki in the cartoon?
I think so, yeah.
Which obviously went on to have a massive impact. He's the Scrappy-Doo of Godzilla movies.
Prior to that, in the films, we'd had Minya or Minilla, the son of Godzilla, who actually got his own title movie, Son of Godzilla, in 1967. So I suppose Godzuki, if Godzuki did have any sort of precedent, it was in Son of Godzilla. But
his rich heritage is what you mean, Daryl. The rich lineage that went into bringing Godzuki onto the cartoon screens. So that ran around 79, 80 sort of period. But we also had a failed attempt at the first Western Godzilla movie around this period, which was Steve Miner attempted to make a 3D Godzilla movie in the States, but it never came to anything. Obviously, the success of Friday the 13th Part 3, 3D, inspired them to think they could do a Godzilla movie. Sadly, or perhaps happily, that one didn't get made.
Miner would have gone on to direct Jason versus Godzilla at some point there. If that
there you go. So shared universe.
There's one that we missed. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, but we did get another. Toho came back to the table with The Return of Godzilla in 1984.
At the time, I mean, this had been 9 or 10 years since the last movie, and it didn't immediately lead to a revival of Godzilla. It sort of stands as a little bit of a one-off, a little bit of an odd anomaly in the series. That it gets lumped in as the start of the Heisei era, but I remember when it came out, and I bought a copy on video, and I've still got my VHS tape of it, and it does sort of stand alone. It's like this little strange thing floating around between the Godzilla eras.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of attempts to be a kind of reboot, I guess. Getting rid of some of the more sillier elements. Although it's all pretty silly, isn't it? Really,
it is. It doesn't really work in that sense, does it? Because it is just a daft monster movie itself. So and as such, it didn't kickstart the franchise again.
No, it didn't. It was released worldwide, Godzilla, in 1985, released in cinemas throughout the world. But we didn't get another one after that until 1989, where we got Godzilla versus Biollante. And that did kickstart a little run of a movie practically every year through the early to mid 90s.
Yeah. Now immediately with Biollante, you've got the whole sort of ecological concern coming back in, because Godzilla's basically fighting pretty much a giant plant.
I think the creature. I mean, we talked a little bit about creature design, but not in great detail. I mean, a lot of them were fairly similar designs, in the sense of, apart from Rodan, which is a flying monster, but a lot of them were a guy in a suit with various decorations. Yeah. And Biollante really stands out as something a little bit different from what had gone before.
Yeah, I think it surprised people. I think people when a new Godzilla film was announced, I think everyone sort of had a picture of what it was going to be like based on what they'd seen before. And yeah, Biollante was genuinely sort of surprising and genuinely different.
I find this period fascinating because it's a period when I was growing up. So obviously, I was watching none of these movies because they weren't getting released in the UK around that period. But looking back on it, I can see how the development of the franchise goes. It starts off fairly serious again, and then gets more and more family friendly as it goes on.
Yeah.
So I watched Godzilla versus Mothra from 1992 last night because you got to see Mothra again, haven't you? It's the Return of Mothra, and it was very. It was kind of like Godzilla versus Mothra versus Indiana Jones, and you had this sort of like crazy archaeologist who gets hired to find Mothra's egg, and the first 30-40 minutes of the movie is like an Indiana Jones movie. You got like rope bridges and all kinds of stuff.
You do wonder if some of these where there's a script that someone's written and the studio says, we like this, it'd be better if it had Godzilla in it, though.
Yeah, so, I'd 30% more Godzilla.
Yeah. So the kind of things end up getting retrofitted somehow to become Godzilla films, yeah.
Yeah, possibly. They tend to hold together. I mean, they're good family fun capers, and the model work is fairly strong, I think, during this period. I don't think it's got anything to be ashamed of. I think it definitely feels, again, of its time. But compared to the 60s ones, the effects are comparable. Definitely the way that it's shot is comparable. There's a lot of good in this period, and obviously you get all the big guys come back. You get King Ghidorah come back.
Well, I think the 1991 film Godzilla versus King Ghidorah is up there in my top 3 Godzilla films. I think I love that.
And you also get in that movie Mecha King Ghidorah as well.
Yes, yeah. What's not to like, But yeah, I think the we as we've said, we love the Subaraya special effects, but I think the effects in these sort of late 80s, early 90s films are sort of notable as well. They're reverent to the originals, but they're using modern techniques, and they're using them in a way that when you watch those films now has got a charm of its own.
Well, I think they hold up quite well because they're not. I mean, a lot of you think back to like say 92, 93. You're talking, Jurassic Park being released as a big movie, and things like that, and everyone's doing computer generated effects around that period. And none of these have that kind of elements. I mean, they might have some, but a lot of it's still model work. It's still man in suit. So it holds up really well. You don't watch it back and think, God, that looks like Lawnmower Man. Awful. That kind of special effects where it's just like, ooh.
Okay, so they are sticking with the physical effects for the most part, but they're using the more modern techniques to kind of tidy up around the edges a little. Yeah. Which I think always is going to date in the same way that CGI from that era does.
But that's sort of ahead of its time, because it's what a lot of filmmakers do now. They sort of use CGI not so much to create creatures and create sort of unreal worlds, but to enhance buildings and the natural environment and so on. And it's almost sort of touching on that sort of territory at times.
Yeah, it's really good. I mean, they don't mess around. They bring back the big guys. They bring back King Ghidorah. They bring back Mothra. They bring back Mechagodzilla. And they don't mess around. They bring back Rodan. So they hit the biggies. It's a pretty much a reboot franchise. In the 90s, they're not continuing on from the 70s. They're forging new territory and reintroducing those characters. So that ran on to 1995, relatively successfully. I'm not quite sure why they stopped making them. I'm assuming it was because the rights were purchased by the American studio to make.
It probably wasn't like that, but I don't think they ever publicly admit that they were taking a little payment to not touch Godzilla for a few years.
Yeah. There was obviously a hiatus clause in the contract, wasn't there? But they came back in 1999 with the Godzilla 2000, and that sparked the Millennium area. But let's just have a kickstart on let's have a quick talk on the Roland Emmerich.
The giant elephant in the room.
Yeah, the Godzilla 1998 movie. Roland Emmerich, Dean Devlin, hot off the success of Independence Day. What could go wrong?
Before we get into slagging this off, which I'm sure we're all going to, think back to 1998 and think when the film had been announced, we knew it was coming, and remember when that first trailer hit and everybody went, wow, this looks fantastic.
I seem to remember it was a specially shot trailer. It's not stuff that's in the final film.
Yes, it was. It was.
Museum where they're looking at a T-Rex skeleton or something, and then Godzilla's foot descends.
Yeah.
It's a good trailer. I'll give them that. Yeah.
Everybody went crazy for it.
Yeah.
Which made what was delivered all the more disappointing, I think.
Yeah, it's it's not great, is it? Let's get into it. Have we got any defense of it first? Have we got any defense?
Not really. No.
I'm worried now because Darryl, you're usually the guy who will find something.
Yeah, I know. All I can say is it's got Matthew Broderick in it.
Yeah, I was going to say Matthew Broderick is a fine actor, but he's not.
And even he can't cut it here.
Yeah, you don't really think of him for kind of as a leading man for a massive
$1
million special.
I say it's got Matthew Broderick in it. There's one thing it's not got in it: Godzilla.
Okay.
I don't know what this thing is that they put in as the creature that invades New York, but it ain't Godzilla.
Well, I think even in canon it's not Godzilla, because if I remember right, I think it's Godzilla Final Wars, which is what I think the final of the Millennium films. The American Godzilla turns up in that and gets killed very easily
gets his arse kicked by the real Godzilla. In fact, I think I read Toho have redubbed that character as they call that character Zilla.
Yeah,
and they say it's because it's Godzilla with all of the God taken out of it.
Okay, that's fair enough. They weren't shy on sharing their opinion, Toho, though, were they, on this one? Because it didn't take them long to crank out another one.
Yeah, along with the rest of the world.
Well, yeah. The design of it is definitely more T-Rex inspired. It's more Jurassic Park inspired than it is Godzilla inspired, I think.
Yeah. And I mean, it's got a good cast on paper. Broderick, it's got Jean Reno, it's got Hank Azaria in it.
Harry Shearer.
But It's also got Maria Pitillo in the female lead. Now, I don't want to sort of cast any aspersions there, but she is atrocious.
Mm-hmm. Well, I must admit, I don't remember her being any worse than anyone else in this movie. You know?
Fair enough. I thought she stood out as particularly bad, but
I'm not sure Roland Emmerich had his attention fully on the actors' performances through the making of that film. I think he was probably more thinking about other certain special effects considerations and things.
Yeah. Now, hadn't in the build-up to the film, while TriStar was sort of putting it all together, hadn't Jan de Bont been mentioned as a possible director?
Yeah, that's right.
And how do we think that might have gone?
If it was the same script, the same design, then, you know, Orson Welles could have directed it, and it wouldn't have been Citizen Kane too. You know what I mean? It was still going to be the same.
We're not just putting it all down to Roland Emmerich.
No, absolutely not. No, I think for me, the biggest problem with it is it kind of misses the fun of a Godzilla movie.
Yeah.
I think by this point in the history of Godzilla, and in some ways, the last two American Godzilla movies that were made, they're the same. We've gotten to the point in the history of the world's awareness of Godzilla where we know there's a serious film there, but no one really wants to watch the serious film anymore. People want to watch the fighting monsters film and the fun Godzilla movie.
I've been watching this week, coincidentally, in between rewatching some of the Godzilla films. I've been watching the recent Criterion Bruce Lee box set. And it's fascinated me that Bruce Lee films are structured in the same way as Godzilla films, in that you sort of get plot for 20 minutes and then a fight scene, and then plot for 20 minutes and then a slightly bigger fight scene. And then right at the end, it's the big fight, and Bruce or Godzilla get to really show their stuff. And it's been absolutely fascinating watching those films in tandem and seeing how much the structures sort of mirror one another. And it is that fun element, as you say, Adam. It is partly it's having that familiarity of knowing how the plot's sort of going to unfold, and partly just isn't it great to watch guys in rubber suits or amazingly well created and well-designed sort of computerized monsters sort of duking it out on screen or treading on buildings, you know.
And I think the thing with Emmerich and Devlin coming off Independence Day, I think it was soon found out that the casting of that movie of Independence Day was spot on. Yeah, it elevated the plot, it elevated the film. So you had the sort of like characters that the audiences like spending time with. You know, your Will Smith characters, Jeff Goldblum characters. You had those characters, even the prime minister, even the president in Independence Day. You like spending time with those characters. Whereas you watch Godzilla, and it's like, I don't want to spend time with these characters. I just want to watch Godzilla blow things up, and it just never really got that. It needed the injection of a charismatic leading man or leading lady that would elevate the mundane plot elements.
Right, and Emmerich's carried on making this type of film, and has never captured that magic of Independence Day ever again. So Godzilla wasn't even a one-off in that sense.
No, it started the trend, I think.
And amazingly, didn't finish his career, but
no, I mean, well, no, it didn't. But there you go. What can you do? What do you need to do to lose a career in now after making something like Godzilla?
Yeah.
But the silver lining on that massive storm cloud was that Toho Studios carried on and got their finger out and started making more films. So they didn't mess around. 1999, the next movie by Toho came out the following year.
So we're now into a new era as well. These are called the Millennium.
The Millennium era, that's right, yeah. And it established Godzilla back where he belongs. It literally said, "This is how you do Godzilla, guys." While it wasn't anything super innovative, it re-established Godzilla back on the big screen.
I think it wasn't just that Godzilla was a big disappointment; it's that it was worldwide a big disappointment. That it was like articles were written about the failure of this film, and it was kind of a talking point that how badly they had messed up Godzilla. And I think that Toho clearly thought, well, we've got 30 years experience making Godzilla films. We can show them what they should have done, and we could do it 5 or 10% of the cost, and we'll show you that, I guess, a bit of national pride there as well, showing that Godzilla is a Japanese icon and only the Japanese can get him right, maybe. Yeah.
And maybe also like a fear of the stink lingering on the Godzilla names to some extent, because like it was such a big flop that you could have started saying, well, it's obviously it's Godzilla as well. It's not just the treatment of it; it's Godzilla as well. It's the character's outdated, blah blah blah. You could start to that if left to foster, that could become a part of an argument. But they didn't let it foster. They came out with a strong movie straight away and rebooted it. So this movie acts as a sequel to the original, doesn't it? In that it takes out all the other films and reboots it again, with the only the 1954 movie being canon, I guess, in if you can call anything canon in the Godzilla franchise.
So it's the recent Halloween of Godzilla film.
Yeah. So it's interesting. It reestablishes it, and then they go on a run of another 4 or 5 movies here in the early 2000s that are fairly standalone. You don't need to watch; they're not sequelized. They're just another Godzilla adventure. Culminating with Godzilla Final Wars, which was the 50th anniversary film of Godzilla, which is a riot, a real fun jump. I think he fights every single monster he's ever fought.
That's the film that you wanted when you saw the title "Destroy All Monsters" in 1969.
Yeah.
They finally did it.
I'm quite amused by this. He fights literally every monster that he's ever faced. Comes back for a second bout, or indeed in some ways a 50th bout. But also one of the criticisms of this movie is there's too much time spent with the humans. That's literally one of the criticisms on this movie, where he fights like everybody, including Zilla, as we've said. I mean, it was a hot film because the director was coming off a big worldwide hit with Versus, wasn't it? It was the Ryu Kitamura?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess, Versus was a part of that kind of the Asia Extreme thing that was happening around the turn of the millennium, and had he worked in the West by that point? I can't remember, because he made Midnight Meat Train and 1 or 2 other films in the West.
Yeah, I think he went on to those sort of just after. I think almost immediately after Final Wars. I think.
Yeah,
and I may be wrong on that, but I think so.
And so I guess it's a case of I guess he was a name and that genre film fans were watching at that point after Versus. So they gave him kind of the keys to the kingdom, said, "Go have fun," I guess. Yeah,
well, of course, the young directors who were working on this new Godzilla era had all grown up as kids. They watched the Honda films, and I think you get this in American cinema and in Western cinema, where everybody who worked on Jurassic Park and everybody that has worked on every big sort of blockbuster movie says, "Oh yeah, we grew up watching Ray Harryhausen. Ray Harryhausen's our god," And these guys in Japan, they were saying the same about Honda and Subaraya.
Yeah,
and I think that shows in the films as well. Although they're using the most up-to-date technology and using it really well and to great effect, I think it's important to them to keep some of the spirit of the Inashiro Honda films. So,
now, some of the plots for these are pretty out there. It's like they're going through loops to make them interesting, when ultimately what we want to see is monsters fighting each other and buildings being blown up.
Is that not I'm sure the directors would rather have 90 minutes of that as well, but their budgets mean they do need people in rooms to use up some of the runtime.
And this little run has arguably the longest title. Godzilla, Mothra, and King Ghidorah: Giant Monsters All Out Attack, from 2001. That's a mouthful. So we'd already had a big team up of those, and again, similar to the 90s reboots, they bring back the big guys. They bring back King Ghidorah and Mothra, They bring back Mechagodzilla, and then obviously in Godzilla Final Wars, they bring back the whole the whole show, don't they? With like all of them.
It's tried and tested, really, which makes me wonder: did Biollante, which we've said Biollante was a really fascinating, interesting new monster in '89. Was that an experiment that didn't quite work? Because ever since then, they've always tried to sort of bring back the original '60s creatures.
Yeah, possibly.
They're still doing it. They're still doing it now.
Yeah, there's not been a new. I mean, there has been new monsters created, but like
nothing that's ever caught on. There's been no new Rodan or
nothing
new Ghidorah. Yeah.
Nothing that's been in the title either. I mean, a lot of the ones that they introduced, they were like versions of Godzilla. So you had like obviously you had Mechagodzilla in the 70s, but you had Godzillasaurus in Godzilla versus King Ghidorah, 91. You had Space Godzilla. Which was in the title, but again, it's just another version of Godzilla.
Yeah,
you had Destroyer.
The Destroyer made it to the title. Yeah, mid 90s, 95. Who's a great new monster, but again didn't really sort of catch on. So and
you had Megaguirus in 2000.
Yeah,
which again was introduced, but I don't think really landed. It's a flying creature. Gag for those who know. But yeah, so obviously they and again that's I guess that's a trend of cinema, especially when you're dealing with franchises. You tend to go back to things that were popular previously and reboot them for a new generation. That seems to be what they've been involved with in the last 30 years, 40 years, 50 years even, since the 70s, bringing back the monsters. So that came to an end in 2004, and then we didn't get another Toho Godzilla movie for another 12 years.
Yeah. Now, can I just step in there, Adam? Because there's a little extra to add in. You've been saying there have been 36 Godzilla movies. I'm going to throw in a 37th here.
Go for it.
2007, there was a hit Japanese film called Sunset on 3rd Street. I don't know if you've seen it, Pete.
No.
It's a sort of family drama set in the mid-50s, and it's all about sort of lower working class families sort of struggling along to try and make ends meet in mid-50s Japan. And it was quite a hit in Japan. And there was a sequel to it in 2007 called Always. And that started with a dream sequence in which Godzilla invades 1959 Tokyo. So you've got this little mini sort of 5 or 10 minute Godzilla film at the start of this film called Always Sunset on 3rd Street Part 2.
I'm not having it, Darryl. That's not canon.
Were they reusing?
Apparently Toho made the Sunset on 3rd Street films, and they have said that it's the real Godzilla in a real Godzilla movie. So,
but it was a dream.
Well, it is a dream, but Toho do regard it as a Godzilla movie of sorts. So
was it reusing footage, or was it they actually went?
No, it's a brand new sequence. Yeah. I guess I've never checked this. I guess you could probably watch the 5 minutes on YouTube, but if you don't want to sit through the whole film's 2.5 hours long. So and apparently very good. I've not seen it, but apparently it's very, very good. But it's a family drama with 5 minutes of Godzilla stamping on things at the start. So
I'm assuming that will have been the last time a man got in a suit for Godzilla. Because when he came back in 2016, it was a computer-generated Godzilla, wasn't it?
Yeah.
For Shin Godzilla.
I don't know, unless they did a motion capture or something.
Possibly, but it's not the same. It's not a man in a suit, though, is it?
Yeah.
They probably did do some motion capture, but it wasn't. It was the first Godzilla film not to feature a man in a suit. Shin Godzilla.
It is an excellent film.
It is an excellent film. You're right. Yeah, but prior to that, obviously we had 2004 Final Wars, and then we didn't have anything until 2014 when Gareth Edwards did his the American remake for Legendary Studios, which has kickstarted the Americanized MonsterVerse that we've had over the last few years with Kong Skull Island and Godzilla King of Monsters, and then in a few weeks' time from when we record here, Godzilla versus King Kong.
Well, the thing about those is, as we've already said in today's recording, the Godzilla films have been a little bit lukewarm. The two Godzilla movies, and especially the last one, the 2017 one, I really didn't like much at all. And yet, as me and you said on the Kong podcast, Adam, Skull Island is probably the second best Kong movie ever made. So we're going into this the new film I just don't know what to expect, because we've got these two sort of separate branches of the franchise that are coming together, and one of them's not been very good, and one of them's been terrific. So it's going to be very interesting to see what happens when Godzilla meets Kong. But I've been disappointed with the two Godzilla films in the MonsterVerse, and again, a lot of that is down to the problems that have been part of the Japanese movies ever since, well, certainly going back to the 60s. That there's just too much human activity, too much talk, not enough monster, and you also get the sense that they thought they were doing something new with the 2014 Godzilla. That they thought we're setting this in a sort of recognisable, real sort of world. We're showing how real people would react if Godzilla sort of invaded. It just didn't feel very fresh to me, and it didn't really sort of give me the Godzilla action that I wanted.
No, for me, it was, I mean, obviously Gareth Edwards had done Monsters prior to this, which got him this gig, and his trick in Monsters was to sort of like show the aftermath of what happened when the monsters come up. So it creates that awe and that sense of scale, and then finally show the monsters and put all your budget onto that towards the end, which worked great for a low budget movie. For the Godzilla movie, it just felt like, why are you hiding him? Why are you hiding him? You literally, like, every opportunity. He's destroying downtown San Francisco, and you're like in somebody's apartment, and they switch the telly off. It's like, what's going on? What is going on? It really frustrated me. I mean, I didn't think it was that terrible. It was bad, don't get me wrong, but it wasn't as bad as the 90s one, and it wasn't as bad as the 2019 Godzilla King of Monsters one. In that you had at least two characters that you were interested in watching, with Juliette Binoche and Bryan Cranston, both whom, spoilers, die fairly early on, and then you're left with the charisma void that is Aaron Taylor-Johnson in this movie.
My memory of it is it being far too interested in family relationships when there's a monster stomping around outside, and it's kind of this is very much a tapping your foot in the cinema, kind of trying not to look at your watch film.
On with it. And then King of Monsters. Whew. Wow, that's yeah. I mean, there's for a film that features so many fight sequences, because there's loads in this one. If you think the director compared his movie to Gareth Edwards' movie and said, like, Gareth Edwards did Alien, I'm doing Aliens. So it'll be like, you've introduced it, got the seriousness, and now we're going to have fun. And it's like, there's no fun to be had in this movie. There really isn't. And you have King Ghidorah fighting Rodan, you have King Ghidorah fighting Mothra, you have King Ghidorah fighting all of them. It's a proper monster fest. For anyone who argues that all you need to make a good Godzilla movie is have a bunch of big fights, this is a movie that you watch to prove them wrong. There is more to a Godzilla movie than just having giant monsters fight.
Yeah, I think we'd seen that in American cinema of the 2010s already, because the kaiju influence had started filtering through to American cinema by then. As we've already said, you had Mechagodzilla doing a little cameo in the Spielberg movie, but the big influence was on the Pacific Rim films. And they are, again, what you've just described, Adam. They're sort of lots and lots and lots and lots of fights, but to no real great effect. I think the one kaiju style film that I love of recent years was Rampage, which I just thought captured the spirit of what a classic Godzilla film is.
video game that is also very lightly lifting Godzilla elements. Yeah. And there was Rampage is fun just because
it's great. It's monsters fighting, it's monsters crashing into buildings, it's monsters treading on buildings, and some of the monster characters even have, sort of very overt sort of Japanese kaiju sort of influence as well. There's one character that's very much like Gyaos from one of the Gamera films. So sort of flying fox type thing, and that's sort of echoed by one of the creatures in this. So they're wearing their influences on their sleeve, I think. But Pacific Rim, I think, showed all the same faults as the last Godzilla movie from the States. In that, as you say, it was lots and lots of fight, all action, but to at the end of it, to no great effect.
Yeah. Normally, I'm not a fan of. I'm not a guy who sits there and thinks, no, don't cast that person in this movie. Don't you want to cast a big megastar? But I always feel like in these movies, they cast amazing actors in these movies. This King Monster's got Sally Hawkins in there. You've got a good range of acting talent in this movie, and I almost feel like I don't want those people in this movie because no matter how good Sally Hawkins is in this, she's not going to be able to raise it above what it is. So you almost need like a Tom Cruise in there. You almost need like a Will Smith in there. Somebody whose star power is arguably as big as Godzilla's.
Yeah, the disaster movies of the 70s, which I suppose are the nearest American cinema got to the sort of destruction aspect of Godzilla, did that. In fact, they went to town with it. Not only did they have a Tom Cruise or an equivalent of him in there, Robert Redford or someone, they had half a dozen big stars in. The star power was the big thing there.
Isn't it a case of their cast? If you go and get Will Smith or Tom Cruise, then that's 20 minutes of your film gone in terms of CGI budget. And
I guess so. Yeah.
I guess, but I think it's worthwhile. I think it's worthwhile. I mean, with King of Monsters, for instance, it's about 80 characters in it. It's ridiculous. Yeah. You've got so many characters. Chop half of those in there, chuck them into the Tom Cruise budget, and you're all right. You're moving on. It's not a problem. But there's just so many characters in this movie that I don't care about any of them. You got Millie Bobby Brown, who's a great actress, and is absolutely wasted in this movie. Yeah. She doesn't do anything, and then apparently we're supposed to care towards the end of the movie, and it's just so bad. Sorry, see, I watched it again last night. So it's so fresh in my head. So I apologize for being so down on it. But all that said, I am immensely looking forward to Godzilla versus Kong. I think the trailer nailed that perfectly, and fingers crossed that's got the fun element that we're all looking for.
Now we've been there with good trailers before. Don't forget 1998.
Yeah,
I agree.
It does seem to have hit a nerve into. I don't know if it's because people have been locked up for a year and haven't been out to see a big spectacle movie as well. But anticipation for this film seems way off the charts compared to the recent like Godzilla films. So I think you're saying people, it appears to be delivering what people want, which is just monsters hitting each other with minimal human complications, which I think people are ready for that at the moment. But whether it delivers that or not, we'll see.
Do you think that there's a magic in bringing Kong and Godzilla together as we know it happened in 1962, but a lot of the modern audience might not be aware of that, and these names have still got that sort of star power. Which means I think in this movie you almost don't need a megastar cast. You've got the stars there. You've got this idea of Godzilla versus Kong, and I think that could be enough to carry this.
Yeah, I agree. I think this is. In fact, I don't even know who's in it. Other than Godzilla and King Kong. I'm just sitting there thinking, like, who is the star of it? I'm assuming
starring Godzilla as himself.
Yeah, I literally cannot remember who's in this movie. I'm assuming that Millie Bobby Brown returns, in this one, but I literally can't remember. So
from Skull Island turning up in it as well.
I don't. Well, the 70s. That was set in the 70s, wasn't it? The Kong Skull Island.
Yeah.
So in the timeline, anybody that was in that first movie needs to be like 50 years older.
Okay.
So I'm not sure, really. I don't think there's anybody from those movies turning up. But it's but it literally goes to show that I don't really care. I think those two names are big enough to carry the movie.
That is reflected in the trailers as well, because the trailers are not. They don't care either.
Yeah, I've had a quick look at the cast, and Millie Bobby Brown is in it.
Right.
You've got decent names, but they are all sort of second stringers really. You've got people like Alexander Skarsgård, Rebecca Hall in it. Eliza Gonzalez, Kyle Chandler. So they're sort of known quantities, but
they're not nameable. They're titled.
No, not at all. They're not even a John Goodman or a Samuel L. Jackson, are they? So even the makers themselves, they know that Godzilla and King Kong are their stars, and they're the names above the title. What do we think about Adam Wingard as director? Because he's never done anything on this sort of scale before. But again, I think he's the kind of guy that will have grown up watching Godzilla.
His movies are always fun.
Yeah.
And I'm hoping that's what's going to be brought to the table with this, because
I can see that.
You can bring special effects directors in to direct the big action sequences and action directors, and so he's looking at the overall structure of the film and then the acting. So, I think I'm tentatively hopeful. That said, Michael Dougherty, who directed Godzilla King of Monsters, had a similar track record, for making fun movies and stuff. And it was like, oh,
are they going to get crushed? Like indie directors making their first massive budget Hollywood film, you never know if the machine's going to grind them down. And it's as perhaps happened to Gareth Edwards on his Godzilla. It's kind of the demands of the studio kind of overpowering the things that made them interesting to get the job in the first place.
Yeah, the information I've read on this, if this is right, the film's got almost a 3-hour running time as well. Now that is a thing
that's worrying.
Bode well.
That is worrying. That is worrying.
It says if these things aren't always correct online, but it says 172 minutes.
Is that possibly not because they know in the current situation 90% of people are going to be watching this on a streaming service where you can just pause it.
Yeah, you can watch it episodically.
He may have been editing this time last year and thought, well, I guess 2 hours 10 minutes isn't so important anymore.
Could be.
Yeah.
I mean, it is a sort of modern way of making movies. Even with something like The Irishman, the Scorsese film, that's made to sort of placate the director and him wanting to make a long movie, but B, the streaming service and the company that are sort of funding it all know that it'll appeal to their audience because they can watch it in bits and pieces. And that may well be the same with something like this.
Oh, see, I'm less optimistic now. I was really looking forward to that. It's like, oh.
Yeah, me too in a way. But I could be wrong on the running time, or the internet could be, and B, who knows? They might just pull it off.
Okay, well, just one more part of Godzilla's history that we missed out on, which I'm surprised at, Daryl. Frankly, I'm stunned. But the connection of Luigi Cozzi in the Godzilla history.
I've got that written down on my iPad actually. The Godzilla, yeah.
Godzilla, yeah, exactly.
Luigi Cozzi, one of everyone's favourite Italian exploitation film directors, director of films like Star Crash and so on. In the late 70s, he got the chance to re-release the original Godzilla in Italy. And he did it in what became known as the Godzilla version. And he basically sort of recut the movie. I think, did he film new special effects scenes, I think, for it? Yeah. And sort of colorized it all or tinted it all and re-released it to Italian cinemas. And there's this extra little anomaly in the history of Godzilla, sort of just after the Showa era. And so there's one for Godzilla completists. If you've not seen the Godzilla version of the original Gojira, if you thought that Raymond Burr's Steve Martin Ace Reporter was a sort of travesty of the original, try this one.
I'm intrigued to see it. It's super rare to see because it's not. It's back in the print of it is back in the Toho archive, and it's never been released on DVD, as far as I'm aware. So
I'm guessing that there are sort of means to see the ways of seeing it on the internet. Even you probably have to trawl the dark web to see it, but
we don't condone any of that, though. We don't condone any of that.
me not.
Patiently wait for that mega box set that comes out.
Yeah. Are we going to say any more about Shin Godzilla? Because I think that's worth.
Yes, let's go before we move on.
We sort of overlooked that a bit.
Sorry. Yes, Shin Godzilla, which is Toho's return to the Godzilla franchise in 2016, with a much more horror-leaning movie than they've previously done in any of their incarnations up to that point. Again, we've talked about how it was the first one without the man in the suit, but a really fascinating movie in many ways.
Earlier, Adam, you said the Godzilla films have never quite got the human element right. I think this is the first one where it has, because it is basically a 2-hour drama about a national crisis and the government's failure to act correctly in response, which
I don't know why that would resonate with audiences right now.
The crisis is Godzilla isn't really the main focus of the film.
It's kind of what Gareth Edwards tried in that sense, and he got it wrong, and they've got it right.
Yeah, and I guess in the Japanese, you can say that it's not really you're not really invested in the individual stories of the characters, but you do become invested in kind of this. They are kind of interchangeable bureaucrats totally failing to deal with this crisis, and it does become. It is the only Godzilla film to ever win Best Film at the Japanese Oscars as well. The equivalent of if Skull Island had won Best Film at the Oscars, there would be outrage. But Shin Godzilla can win at the Japanese Oscars, and everyone thinks, absolutely, yeah, fair enough. That was a great film. So, yeah, I'd encourage people to seek out Shin Godzilla, even if Men in Suits doesn't immediately jump out at you.
There's kind of a reason why that they don't do the Men in Suits in many ways, because of the plot, because the creature, as we will call Godzilla for most of the movies, a creature, is evolving before our very eyes on screen, which I thought was a fascinating fascinating take on the Godzilla character. It was like evolving in various different stages, and with each stage, the threat became more and more,
That works really well, I think. It's a great take on an already sort of legendary character. It must have been quite scary for the script writers and the effects people to sort of develop that and think this could go so wrong, and yet they pull it off.
It's interesting directors as well, because it's 2 directors on it. One is, I think his name's Shinji Higuchi, who has a special effects background and kind of grew up watching Godzilla and started making his own, doing special effects and putting together Men in Suit stuff. But the other one is a guy called Hideaki Anno, who actually has a background in anime. He did a series called Neon Genesis Evangelion, which is kind of beloved of many anime fans from about 20 years ago. And I think he's bringing the human interest stuff to it and the satire, and the two mesh really well. And
didn't the Shinji Higuchi also do the Gamera reboots in the 90s?
I think he works on the special effects on those. I'm not sure he directed them.
Oh, no, yes, I meant the special effects side. So he's obviously got a track record of dealing with giant monsters.
and rebooting monsters.
And rebooting monsters, yeah. So this kick-started the Reiwa era of Godzilla movies, which has been a bit of an odd period, because we've got this one Godzilla movie, Shin Godzilla. We've yet to get another live-action movie, which is surprising considering, like you say, it had such worldwide acclaim, Oscars, Japanese awards, but we've not had a sequel to that. But we have had 3 anime movies that have been made between 2017 and 2018.
Well, I wonder, like we said earlier, that there wasn't any Japanese Godzilla films in the run-up to the 90s US film, whether there was some kind of deal done where they wouldn't follow up Shin Godzilla for so long, and then doing animes on Netflix is maybe the loophole that the contract didn't cover. or something.
Yeah, possibly. I mean, Shin Godzilla was made in between. I mean, it was made 2 years after Godzilla, and
I don't know, but I don't know. Maybe no one's come up with a story that they're worried that it's not going to match Shin Godzilla. Within 10, 15 years, there'll be another one from.
Yeah.
Well, I wonder if we're in with Godzilla versus Kong coming out. You know, even though it may be great and it may be a big success, might we sort of be back in Roland Emmerich territory in one way, in that is the catalyst that sort of kickstarts things in Japan. Well, it could work either way. If Godzilla versus Kong is as great as we're hoping, you know, that might give the Japanese the boost to want to make another Godzilla film themselves. Or if it's a disaster, as the Emmerich film was, they can steam in and steal all the glory by making a new film. So I think either way, this new Western movie could well be something that sort of helps those of us that want to see a new Japanese version of the creature.
It's fascinating one. Normally, when you get Hollywood movies made, they've already announced the next 2 or 3 movies and a shared universe spin-off. Whereas this Godzilla versus King Kong, there's nothing slated afterwards. There's nothing like, and then they're going to move on to do this and do that, and it's just a straight. They've announced a Kong cartoon series, I think. But apart from that, they've not announced any other follow-ups. So it just feels like maybe that this is the final one. And then it'll take a little break, maybe, before somebody else comes back and reboots it.
Won't it be end up being similar to the Spider-Man thing, where there was the new Spider-Man every few years? Because if there wasn't, the rights would revert. And then Toho are going to be charging a lot more for the rights to Godzilla if they get those rights back. So
possibly.
So if you make a new Godzilla film every 5 years to keep the rights, it's cheaper than then having to rebuy the rights if Toho regain them. I've no evidence to back that up, but that's just a suspicion.
So you're expecting Godzilla versus Kong to be like a Roger Corman's Fantastic Four, a rights grab?
Well, it's a cake and eat it thing, isn't it? They want to make $1 billion from the film, but they also don't want to lose the rights.
And you can sort of do that because right from the start, or I suppose right from Gigantis the Fire Monster or Godzilla Raids Again in 1955, there's been absolutely no continuity or very little continuity throughout the eras. So Godzilla as an entity, as a character, seems to be something that can be lifted and put into any film, into any situation. Whereas when you're watching the Spider-Man movies, it really sort of does get a bit annoying. It does rankle a little bit because you're sort of you're lost. You're floundering, wondering who this character is, why a new actor's playing him. And with Godzilla, I think they can get away with that a little better.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think, as you say, there's very little continuity. There seems to be more reboots in this franchise than there are actual sequels.
Well, when Daryl says you can put Godzilla into any film, that's got my mind whirring immediately to Godzilla in
Pride, Prejudice, and Kaiju.
Yeah. Why not?
Or in a Mike Leigh drama or something. Yeah,
I'm there.
Yeah,
one ticket, please.
Cool. Again, I want to thank BFI and Quad for supporting this podcast, and we will see you in another couple of weeks. Okay, take care, everyone. Hopefully by then, Godzilla vs. King Kong will be out, and you can let us know your thoughts on our Facebook page. Okay, take care, everyone. Bye.